All right, it is 1:30 and we are going to take off on the Preventing Amputations webinar. My name is Cole Craven. I'm the safety director here at TPM. And I appreciate you being on this. This is a topic that is incredibly near and dear to my heart, something that's really important to me because we're seeing unprecedented numbers. You know, TPM's over 100 years old and we've not seen the amount and variety of amputations. And so, you know, try and get out there in front of as many people as humanly possible. And actually this presentation has been, you know, sponsored, if you will, by OSHA, in that they are trying to get out there and spread the message on this. So I do want to thank them for that, but we'll get into the presentation and here we go. So up in your upper right-hand corner, just a few housekeeping things real quick. You should have a menu, or there's an orange arrow button that's your grab tab, and that opens and closes your menu. You can mute or unmute yourself. I had to mute everybody right off the bat, as I just was getting an insane amount of feedback. So the best way to talk, well, the webcam, it just default is off, it doesn't work, is to either raise your hand or just use the chat screen. And you can type your message in there, what you want to say, who you want to send it to, and then you can just send it. And then as always with any of these that I do, if you have questions about it, there are, you know, I'm happy to provide, you know, content or forms in your menu. Oh, it's the 9th little plus sign down. You should have a materials tab. And I've attached some materials like a lockout tagout program, a machine-specific lockout tagout procedure, and just some training aids for machine guarding and things like that. So just wanted you to have some materials to go out if you know this is as shocking to you as it has been to me over the last couple of years. I wanted you to have some materials that could go out and do something with it. So we're going to spend a good chunk of time just talking about recent incidents in our industry. So, and there have been a lot. You know, there have been a historically high number of amputations and fatalities in our industry. So we're going to talk about those. I'm sure you already recognize the importance of guards and safety devices, but we're going to talk about some other options with those. And then really, hopefully get down to what the root cause of these injuries are, of these incidents are. Because in the trend analysis, to me, it seemed really apparent what, you know, was driving this. Because we've got to turn things around, because it's not getting appreciably better. We're still seeing quite a few, and in fact, I'm going to have to update this presentation because there are 3 more that I have not investigated yet. So with everything we talk about today, there's still 3 more that I can't give you any information on because I haven't gotten a chance to check out everything that happened. So we're going to start with we're going to focus on amputations. We're not going to cover any broken bones. You know, even though those are serious injuries, we're going to just focus on the actual amputations or incidents that have caused, you know, basically permanent disability. And the number one, that was the first one we had. Now this is a couple of years ago now, that they were reaching into a planer. It had been jamming up all day long, or crashed as they called it, and they would leave the planer running. This is kind of a theme with all my planers. This theme holds true. And they were supposed to clean out the jam up in the pieces of wood with like a little piece of lath or a sticker. And he got everything cleaned out, and he saw a little chunk of wood sitting up on the top head of the planer, and reached in to grab it and pull it off. He'd done it many times, and they ran their planer with the heads unguarded so they could come in and sharpen them while they're running, which is pretty common. But just imagine a barrel, if you will, with a few thousand razor blades on it. It's planing the wood down to the exact dimensions they want, and that thing pulled his hand in, his right hand, And the only thing he has left at all is his pinky. That's it. There's nothing there. His hand is just slightly wider than his pinky. That's all he's got left. Over something that it wouldn't have mattered if he'd have left it there or not. And that tends to be kind of a theme through all of these. We had another operator lose tips of 3 fingers cleaning out a planer. Another jam up. Another account. And very, very similar. They don't shut their planer off when they're cleaning out jam ups. They're supposed to use a sticker or a piece of lath. And he knocked out all the big pieces with it. And then for some reason, just the last little piece, he just tried to sweep his hand across and knock it out. And he lost his pinky, his ring finger, and his middle finger on his right hand. Number 3, we had a cleaning crew member that, this is a really long story, but I'll try to keep it short. He was cleaning around as an old stacker, and the stacker was very old, but it still worked really well. It had historically had an off-feed table or an off-feed conveyor off of it. That didn't run well, so we got a brand new one. So we had an old piece of equipment next to a modern piece, and back in the day, we used to drive that off-feed conveyor off of a huge toothed wheel that was on that stacker. And we took the conveyor out, but we left the big toothed wheel because there's no chain on it anymore. So there's not we felt they felt there wasn't a hazard. And when the cleaning crew member was in there working, he's running it so he can blow everything down. And that toothed wheel caught his coat. And it proceeded to twist, amputate his arm very slowly. And the scarier thing with that is that we could have very likely lost him. This is in a big city. This was in a pretty big city for the West, and the paramedics could have been there to him within about 5 minutes, but because they didn't know what building he was in and there were so few people on the campus, from the time he called in, because he had to call in himself, to the time where the paramedics were there to help him was 45 minutes had passed. Had it been a laceration type of amputation, because it took his entire arm, he likely would have bled to death. So that's another takeaway. That's really look at what we're going to do if the bad thing happens, and how are we going to get the help to the people that need it? Because there's generally a gap with a lot of these. The medical help was delayed because we never talked about it. We never planned on what we would do if somebody really, really got hurt, or this has happened this year with a heart attack. So it's worth talking about. It's not necessarily amputation specific, but it's worth the time to talk about what we're going to do if things go sideways. I had another person lose their index finger and their middle finger of the right hand cleaning out a jam up in a planer. So we've already got 3 amputations in planers. Same thing again. They always leave it running. You use a piece of lath or a sticker to knock the pieces out, and he went in to get the last 2 and just tried to swipe his hand through and took his index and his middle finger. Maintenance employee, and they were doing something that I'm a big supporter of, is he fixed a machine and he was standing there watching it operate to make sure what he had done had worked. And as he was standing there, he leaned against another machine and the hydraulic ram cycled and it crushed the tip of his finger and took it off. And then number 6, the employee didn't know the appropriate way to clean out jam ups with this planer, because they had literally taught him to stick his arm in and swipe it out. And they felt that you couldn't get in far enough based upon, their measurements from working. Basically, they had a lot of people who were under 6 foot and you could reach in without hitting the knives. They got an employee over 6 foot. When he reached in, it caught his arm and pulled his arm into the planer. And he ended up losing the tips of multiple fingers and it broke his arm in multiple places. Number 7, this one ultimately, so he got his finger caught in a chain, and it broke it in over 30 places. And he refused to have it amputated, is what they wanted to do. Ultimately, the finger just was so badly damaged that a couple weeks later it got necrotic and it had to be amputated. And then number 8 is there are actually now 4 of these, and we'll talk about 3 of them. Had a run on employees cutting the tips of their index and middle finger of their left hand, cutting those off with a skill saw. So they'll hold a piece of wood in their left hand, and they run the skill saw over it real quick, and they take their fingers as well. And then 9, not an amputation per se, but this is what happens when employees reenact scenes from Texas Chainsaw Massacre with a chainsaw and run it across the top of his thigh while it was running full speed. 10, we had a couple incidents with molders right in a row. And both of them were pretty bad. In essence, we had unguarded side heads on these molders. And in one, as he was walking by, he tripped and stumbled and ran his hand into the molder. And it just shaved off the top of his hand and then the tips of fingers. And then another one, the employee brushed his hand against it. He was walking by it and lost 2 fingers and parts of his knuckle. The thing that was even scarier with that is the people that responded to him, his coworkers that responded to help him, left that unguarded running molder going while they were kneeling down helping him. And they had their heads within 12 to 14 inches of that unguarded side head. So the other takeaway is too, if we're helping somebody who's been hurt, we've got to stop whatever caused the pain. You got to shut off whatever whatever caused the incident. Number 12, we had a veteran, conscientious millwright who'd been there for 25 years. And he was working on a dust collection system. And this kind of is the incident that triggered the trend analysis I did on this. Is he was working in this dust collection system, and it's a big system, and it has gates that come down to knock up the chunks of sawdust if it clumps up. And he'd worked inside of this many times. When he said he thought he knew the machine, he'd worked inside of that thing 100 times, and didn't lock it out, didn't think his hand was going to get in far enough. Those gates closed on his hand, and it took off. That's a picture from his hand, took it off behind the knuckles, and actually, to my understanding, they still never found the fingers. This is 13 is on 2 lists, if you will. They had a jam up. They were had a chain conveyor feeding a hog, and it got just kind of gummed up and clogged up, and they told him to shut it down and clean it out with a shovel and a pick, break it up, and then turn it back on. He left it running and then proceeded to kick and kick and kick, and eventually the conveyor moved, caught his foot, and it pulled him down the chain conveyor and around the drum. He lost his leg and up into his pelvis, had to be surgically removed. He's also going to be on the fatality list because just a couple days later from this happening, he died from the severity of his injuries. We had an employee get his thumb stuck in a chain conveyor, and it, for lack of a better term, it just ripped it right off at the second knuckle. We're still watching that one because they've attached some of it back on, but from seeing it just a couple days ago, it's not looking very positive. Number 15, we had an employee, and this is one of the few this pretty much a brand new employee. Very few of these are new employees, but 2 employees were out there cleaning up just chunks of ice and sawdust and bark and everything underneath the conveyor, and they were supposed to be loading it in a skid steer, but they had an attachment they were supposed to be using. They didn't want to take the time to put that attachment on, so they just had the operator driving it, and the other employee was just pushing big chunks of ice into the bucket. And the employee was getting a particularly large chunk, and he put his hand on the bucket for leverage to try to roll this piece in as the operator tilted it back, and it took all 4 of his fingers off at the knuckle. Then, as I said before, we have quite a few people cutting off fingers with skill saws. Exact same scenario, holding it with their left hand or just running the saw across it real quick. 17 is boy, there's a lot to this one. But long story short, we had an employee who was not trained or authorized, and no one had ever asked him or wanted him to operate this stacker. He decided one day to go over and try to either adjust the machine or what was in the machine. They saw him yank his hand away, and then he took off. He just leapt. The supervisor went over to see what the heck was going on, found the glove on the floor with the thumb in it. But so much time passed with this in tracking down the employee, because he just left. He just took off. They couldn't reattach that thumb. And then there's a fourth one. This is the third, but there's a fourth one of another person cutting their fingers up with a skill saw. And there's one more that I've not had a chance to investigate yet. And then 19, we had an employee try to grab a piece of wood that had fallen behind what they called the nipper, and it just clipped off the ends of like a shingle, and a piece of wood started to fall behind. He reached to get it, and at the same time triggered the nipper, and it took his fingers off. And so I actually have 3 more that I can't give any information on because I just haven't had a chance to investigate them. So along that same note, unfortunately, we've had a high number of fatalities over the last couple of years. We had a millwright who was working on a pickup that he had hoisted up in the air by attaching it to the brush guard. He was changing out leaf springs. He got the first set of leaf springs done, and when he was working on the second, he was in between the tire of the truck and the frame when that brush guard broke off and crushed him in between the body of the vehicle and the tire. And then the picture in the bottom, I guess it's in the middle, that orange and green machine, that is actually the machine. There's an employee working by the end of the stacker, and a board broke, so he went to go get the pieces out, and he waved the operator off. He got the first piece out. She thought he was done, started the machine back up, and as he's grabbing the second piece, his head got crushed in between that orange trolley and the big green frame there in the picture. This is the day after the incident when we're fabricating a guard to keep this from ever happening again. But yeah, this is a day after our guy died. We had a machine operator who was crushed by product while he was clearing out a jam up. That there's a jam up in the sorter, and right around lunchtime. So they basically just paused the line. He went to lunch, came back, and as he was coming up to that sorter, that waterfall, he started flipping boards and clearing it out. And the machine was still in auto mode. And as soon as the eye got clear, the conveyor did what it was supposed to and started loading wood. And he was crushed by product coming down the line. And with number 4, I really don't have much information, as it's almost impossible to get it at this point. We had an operator fall headfirst into a debarker. We had an employee struck by another truck while he was tarping a trailer. He either jumped or fell off directly into the path of another truck. And then my employee that lost his leg up into his pelvis ended up dying a couple days later after he'd been pulled around that drum on that chain conveyor. So and there have been other fatalities, but not related to caught in between or lockout, tag out, or amputation prevention, but all of these directly related to that. So I wanted to look at this and start to put things together and try to figure out what in the heck is going on? How do we prevent this? And the first thing that surprised me is very, very, very few of these are new or newish employees. On average, there's more than 10 years of experience. These are our veteran people that this is happening to, with just a couple exceptions. I'm also concerned about the disproportionate amount of injuries and severe incidents involving planers. It seems to be, I guess, an industry standard or something where we leave the planer on when we're clearing out jam ups. That worries me. But what really struck me, and it started with my millwright, in that he said he actually done it 1,000 times, is what he said. So I went back and talked to my folks with the amputation, and all of them said in one form or another that exact same thing. I've done it that way 1,000 times. And all of them also knew, their instincts were trying to warn them. They knew they were in danger. They knew what they were doing was wrong. And so you got to get people to listen to their instincts. They will. I'm not trying to be flippant, but they'll live longer. They all knew what they were doing was putting them in danger. And then unfortunately, with many of these cases, we had a supervisor or manager walk by things that were being done unsafely, and they did not say anything. They did not correct the behavior. And with almost all of these, they already had lockout tagout procedures in place. They had the equipment, they had the procedures, they had everything. The vast majority of these, they knew it and they chose not to follow it because they just thought it was quicker. And so this is an interesting thing, because a lot of these are not coming from a place of, laziness or not following the rules. My opinion is it's coming from a place where they're trying to be more productive, that they're trying to get more done. And what's happened isn't this is not my phrase, I didn't come up with this, but it's the normalization of deviance, that we've done the wrong thing for so long that becomes our normal. You do anything wrong long enough, and then that'll be the new normal. And it's a confirmation bias. So we've gotten away with it before, so we're going to get away with it again. But it's there's a limit to how many times we're going to get away with that stuff. And then the other thing that it is not overly surprising, but it's really it brings it home, is that it's almost always their dominant hand or the dominant side of their body that they lose. With the hand amputations, it's almost exclusively their dominant hand. So not only are they dealing with an amputation, they're dealing with an amputation, as they would put it, to their better hand. So what do we do? Now we told you all the bad things, and we're talking about all the horror stories. So what do we do? Well, we've got bad habits out there. We do. Maybe little ones and maybe big ones, but we're going to have to retrain people. And if you're a safety person, or you're a manager, or you're a supervisor, whatever you are, you've got to be on the work floor, because it's all about culture. How do we do things there? And we're going to have to remind people. You don't have to get in an argument. You don't have to fight with them, but just remind people, no, we don't do it like that. We're going to lock this out. Or it's like, hey, let's get that guard back on the machine. I know they were planning on doing it at lunch. Let's do it now. Share stories. We've all got them. Let people know. Most of my mills, I've got at least a couple of people who are missing fingers, and they'll tell you exactly how it happened. And it's powerful to have somebody who's had that happen explain to you why it did and what they'll never do again. Now, but we can't walk by anything. We can't just walk by and let somebody be sticking their hand in a running machine. Like I said, you don't have to get in an argument, you don't have to get in a fight with them, but just remind them of how we do it. Either you're going to remind people that, hey, this is how we do it, it's the right way, or you're going to reinforce we do it the wrong way, because I'm not going to say anything to you. So conduct audits, take a look at things, audit your people, audit your machines. And then maybe the biggest one I'd give you is, how do you prevent a similar accident? Lock out when you're clearing jam ups. A solid third of those are from machines where we left them running while we were clearing out a jam up, because the plan was just to put a stick in there. But obviously we have an issue with keeping it just to that. So what do you need to know with all this? Well, we got to talk about the OSHA requirements. You need to know what types of machines and the type of amputation hazards they have. You need to have a plan and a rule for your maintenance and repair stuff. And then with the guarding, there's a misconception that that it's can only be expanded metal guarding, or there's a lot of different options there. We're just trying to keep the employee from coming in contact with the dangerous bits, and it doesn't mean we have to build a metal box around it. And then with all of this, there's going to be safe work practices, and just sticking a stick in the planer to clean out the chunks is not a safe enough work practice. So, the OSHA standards, we all have those requirements, but I'll tell you, in addition to the lockout tagout and the machine guarding requirements, well, if you have an amputation, you have the bad thing happen, I guarantee you'll have a visit from either federal or state OSHA, depending on where you're located. It's not a maybe, it's a when. Most of the time it's within 48 hours of the incident. And they are going to go through you to the nth degree on machine guarding, your program and what's on the machines, and your lockout tagout program. They may go through other things as well, but they're going to go through those with a fine-tooth comb. And if you had an amputation, honestly, who really brought them there if we had an amputation? We asked them to come in. So they're going to look at your training. They're going to look at your machine-specific procedures. Every machine has to have its own procedures. And then they're going to look at, do you conduct your annual review and make sure everybody's still doing it? And you have to do all those things on top of your policy, on top of everything else. You got to go through and actually make sure people are doing it. And there have been many OSHA and labor and industry audits. The vast majority have been from post-incident. We had an amputation, we had a fatality, we had somebody get hospitalized. There have been a few that have been from employee complaint. And if you get an OSHA visit from an employee complaint, do not waste 1 millisecond of your time trying to figure out who did it. It doesn't do you any good, and in fact, could get you in even more trouble. And here's the problem: is you have the bad thing happen. Be prepared to get other visits every year for the next 3 to 5 years. And then on top of that, there is enhanced enforcement right now on the amputation prevention initiative. So they're trying to prevent those, which needs to be done. And the combustible dust enhanced enforcement is still in play. So it's very, very likely that you're eventually going to have them walk through and take a look at what you got going on. So we're pretty good at understanding so we got to protect at the point of operation, where it cuts or the hole drills through or where we're shearing something. We do a pretty good job, in essence, protecting the saw blades. What we don't do the best job on protecting is the conveyors or the mechanisms driving that or feeding it. So, on like the stacker trolley or on carriages or things like that, or we don't look at the belts or the chains that are driving it. So we'll a lot of times we'll protect the saw blade, if you will, but then we don't protect what's driving it or what's feeding it. So you got to look at the entire process, and it's not just the point where the work's being done. It's really anything that one of our employees get caught in or between or under. So the guarding requirements, and so this is coming from the standard, right? So the guarding requirements got to prevent contact either with employees and the machines or employees and the product. So we got to prevent contact. It has to be secured to the machinery. It has to protect employees from falling or flying objects and can create no new additional hazards. Now it can allow for safe lubrication and maintenance, and it should not or can't cause interference with production. And that's been the sticking point. That's been some of the argument from companies on this machine guarding. But with this picture, and I see this relatively often, we've got a guard in there, and it's only kind of half doing its job. And so, we've got one in place, but it's not doing exactly what we need it to do, or we have some other issues. And I see that quite a bit. But the guards don't have to just be expanded metal. They really don't. You can have fixed guards, absolutely. You can have interlocked. You take one off and it shuts down, whole sections of machine. You can have adjustable ones. You can have ones that are self-adjusting. That you feed a piece of product in and it closes down over it as the product goes through. But just remember, distance in and of itself is a guard. You can guard by distance. And you'll see that a lot where we try to prevent access. We'll put things in rooms, but putting up chains or railings or gates or bars, that's acceptable. Once again, we just have to prevent the employee from getting in contact with a running machine. And the guards are just part of it, but it's only a part of it. Procedurally, we have to be sure that we've got the right way of doing it in place and that people are following it. So it's going to be all of this plus, signs and procedures and training and just awareness. And it also, once again, it doesn't have to be those metal guards. It can be light curtains. You can have somebody guarded by distance because it's a two-hand control. And if they leave both those controls, the machine shuts down. That is guarding. You can have pressure sensitive devices. someone's running or testing basically if you walk in and any weight goes on this pad, it shuts everything down. I see that occasionally around like robots, palletizing robots, and if anybody crosses the threshold, it just stops. So those robots, unfortunately, can be deadly because they're just there to do their job. They don't care if somebody's in the way or not. And you can, and this is relatively common, guarding can be that we just have somebody restrained in place. They're on a body positioning system and they literally cannot get close enough. If you do those, you've got to really, really be conscientious about how it's maintained and how it's followed, and then it fits everybody. But I'll see that. I see that at a number of my mills where the person is positioned in place and they can't fall, and that's fine. Just make sure that is in good condition, because if that fails, you're going to lose an employee. So just go through, your best work practices. How do we prevent this? Go through, look at your machines, identify where you've got hazards, and then take a look at and so you understand the function of those guards and those safety devices. Why are they there? What are they preventing? And my recommendation would be is you have a small group of personnel who are authorized to even remove those. You got your maintenance guys or your millwrights, your mechanics, but everybody knows that they need to report damaged or missing or guards that are inadequate. Train your people and your managers on the risks of circumventing those guards, and then just have operators inspecting those machines and stuff before they use it. Because you can't follow a safety rule, or an employee can't follow a safety rule if they've never been trained on it. And that has been with a couple of these has been part of the issue, is they had no idea how to do it the right way. And this is pretty standard stuff, but you should only be removing guards for maintenance or repair. The minute one of those guards is, you decide it has to come off, the thing should be locked out before you remove it. I'm a big believer in that we need to lock out machines when we're cleaning out jam ups. And then just de-energize it before you're changing your dies or tools. This is pretty basic, maintenance lock and tag out. And so I want to go back again with this trend analysis, because this, I think, tells us a lot. It's our veteran employees that this is happening to, by and large, with very, very few exceptions. It's our veterans. And I hear complacency kills, and it does. But a lot of what this is you see non-routine tasks. You see something they only do once in a great while, and then they're really in danger. With the planers, hopefully they're not jamming up more than they're regularly running. They get into the zone and they're feeding that planer. And so when the jam up happens, and now we've got a non-routine task, and that's when people are in danger. But they've all been, not all, but most of them have done it wrong many times. And they knew they were in danger. And it's unacceptable to have a supervisor or a manager or a lead walk by and see somebody with their head or arm or hand in the machine, and they know it shouldn't be there, and they don't say anything. And I would challenge everybody, whether you're a supervisor or lead or a manager or not, you see a coworker doing that, remind them of how we do it. With almost all of these, they had lockout, tagout policies and procedures, and the people knew them, had been trained on them, and chose not to follow it because it was quicker. But this is coming from a place of, these are people who are wanting to be successful, that are wanting us to be successful. And we can use that. We have to get them in the mindset of we do it the right way, whether it takes more time or not. And that has to be part of the training, that they understand that you don't know what to do, you need to stop and get some help immediately. And it's a normalization of deviance. We've done it wrong for so long, that becomes our new normal. And once we get away with it, we tend to assume we're always going to get away with it. And all these people, they're permanently affected. Some of them are having to learn to do things with their non-dominant hand. That trying to button a shirt with your left hand if you're right-handed is dang near impossible. But they're having to, because it's almost always the dominant side that gets damaged. So as part of this, and once again, I want to thank OSHA again for for sponsoring this. We're trying to get the word out there. We're using a grant to do that. But the law, the truth of it is, our workers are entitled to working conditions that don't pose a risk of serious harm. We have the right, the workers have the right to ask OSHA to come in and take a look at their workplace. They have the right to do that without any retaliation. They can get copies if we do sound tests or air testing. So they have the right to know what's going on in the workplace. That's 100% their right. That's under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. I'm not going to read all of these off, but I think the first couple are the ones that are important. Under the law, the employers have a responsibility, number one, to provide a workplace free of serious recognized hazards and comply with standards, rules, and regulations issued under the Occupational Safe and Health Act. We have to examine workplace conditions to make sure they conform to the standards. And then I think very important, make sure employees have and use safe tools and equipment, properly maintain the equipment. So not only do we have to provide it for them, but we have to ensure that they're doing what they're supposed to be told, what they're supposed to be doing. Workers all have a right. You can file an anonymous complaint over the phone easily, and they have a right to do that. OSHA will not tell the employer ever who wasn't filed the complaint. I would not spend a millisecond. I wouldn't spend 1/2 of a second trying to figure out who it was. It doesn't do you any good, even if you know. It's only going to get you in more trouble. Because if you discriminate them in any way, shape, or form, and a lot of things can be viewed as discrimination, then you're gonna have an issue for a long period of time, because it's gonna be pretty easy for them to find you in violation of the whistleblower protection if you retaliate on somebody. So it's not even worth doing. It doesn't change the situation you're in at all. I appreciate everybody coming to this. I just hope we get in front of enough people and change, enough minds on this so that we can get people to slow down and do it the right way. I also am hoping we can get people to look out for each other, so we're not afraid to stop somebody from doing something that's going to get themselves hurt or killed. That's my contact information. If you need anything or want anything from this presentation, let me know. I'll give you a couple minutes to pull those materials off your materials tab, so you can open it up and you can either drag or you can just save those. But I just want to thank you, and I'll go be quiet here in just a minute, and I'll shut this off in just about 30 seconds. Thank you.